So I just finished recording the first one of these VLOGMAS recordings. That was a huge load off. I'm way more relaxed now. I'm still having a trouble looking at the camera, but let's see if we can figure that out. Today I'm going to do what I promised you yesterday. Today what we're going to do is give you the office tour. Let me tour you around.
Ain't no stopping us now. Wake up in the morning and I'm gonna.
So I'm just going to start by going around the room and pointing out everything I have. Hopefully it's great. Let's see how it works. When we start, let's start this direction. So when we start this direction, you can't, let me just go like this. Oh, it was very pro. It's a little bit dirty if I go any far past that, so I'm just going to leave it there. Over here, what we have is my Christian Lassen print or painting. We can argue about that later. Hang on a second. I'm a big fan of stuffed critters, so here's the three I have in my office. This is Billiken. So he is basically the patron saint of two places, St. Louis and Osaka. Osaka is where I consider my second hometown. That's where I went after I lived in Arkansas. I moved to Osaka for a number of years, so I love it very much. Little Taco, which is an octopus, if you can't recognize it, also from Osaka. These are my two peons to my Osaka background. And then this one is Jackrabbit from the Grand Canyon area. When me and my wife, before we got married, went on a road trip, the best advice I was given was take your wife on a road trip in a car. If you guys come back not fighting each other, that's the one you should marry. And it was advice I took. Maybe you could take it too, up to you. These are those three. What else do I have? Oh, I'm really bad at this pointing thing. Hang on. There. Speaking of wife, this is a photo of when we got married. It's very beautiful. We went up to a mountaintop, didn't pay anybody anything. We just went to a mountaintop, told everyone to meet us up there. That's where we had, and then we only had dinner with each other. If you really loved us, you'd buy your own dinner and think about us. This is, I'm very bad at this. There. This is the plaque you get when you leave the public defender's office. I did 6.5 years at the public defender's office. They basically trained me how to be a lawyer. If I'm not very good, you can blame them. When you leave and you've won a trial, at least one, hopefully, that's what you get. You'll see many other public defenders had the margin around their pirate flag signed. I knew I wanted to hang this in my office. I was scared what people would write, so I just left it right there. Here, this is a certificate from the Emperor of Japan signed to my wife's grandfather, who was the person who wrote the calligraphy book the Japanese would copy in order to learn calligraphy. Hang on. This is a signed copy of the first portrait done of Howard Mackie, the famous comic book writer, the inventor of the second Ghost Rider, the architect of many of the best Spider-Man stories, many other things. When I was 7 years old, I won a contest and I drew him. I told you about the certificate of Japanese. This is the, I believe it's the Royal Order of the Chrysanthemum Award. Maybe someone else can clarify that for me. But that's, somehow it ended up in my office. And that's why we have this here. This is a framed copy of the first appeal I won, which is what I argued before the Hawaii Supreme Court. I won this appeal, which set my client free, said insufficient evidence, so they actually had to release him from Halava. The warden at Halava said he hadn't had one of those before, and he didn't know what to do. I said, well, I have the paper, you got to let him out. And he goes, well, where do I send him? And I said, I think you just let him out. You just open the door. I called my client and told him that he won. He was happy, but everyone else in the prison said, well, why are you still here? We don't believe you. It turned out 4, 5, 6 days later, they played the news clip in Halava where everyone was watching the news, and it said the Supreme Court decided that the defendant won the case and he had to be released forthwith. The prison, what he called me and told me later, the prison erupted in a cheer. Yeah! Because he had told everybody he had won his appeal, and then they didn't let him out for a number of days. Everybody thought he was lying and was just making big body in there and acting like a big shot and that he wasn't going to do it. But then they saw his face on the news saying they had to release him. They held him another 6 days. He said everybody, the prison guards and the other inmates, treated him like a king because they didn't know what to do. They didn't have the order to release him. And the inmates all were ecstatic that he was getting released. So he said they treated him real well. The reason that happens is there's a specific amount of time, and it's set in the court rules and the statute. There's a specific amount of time before judgment is final, so they can't release him until the judgment is actually final. So it's sort of like having a check which you can't cash for 20 days. That's what happened to him. Meanwhile, everyone else knows they can't cash for 20 days, and he was the king of the walk for about 12 days in there until they did let him out. My Hasidic art calendar. This is when I wrote a website for Mauiwatch. If you're familiar with the website Mauiwatch, Mauiwatch.com, it's a huge Facebook group. It's probably the largest one for Maui. The GMO initiative was a huge deal on Maui at the time. So Mauiwatch asked me to look through the advertisements and the law that were being passed and to go over it and discuss it. Well, I did. I went through it. We made a short essay on it. There were some videos and things involved, but it was basically 2 HTML pages, 2 web pages, and discussed all the different outcomes, which parts were good, which parts were bad, which parts were honest, which parts were less than honest, and what it all meant. In response, I had 2 very interesting groups endorse, but agree with what I said. On one side, the Babes Against Biotech, the group that is very much anti any GMO organization, gave me a sort of tongue-in-cheek, but what they called it. It was Honest Lawyer Award, or the celebration of an honest lawyer, and wrote that what I wrote in there was fair down the middle, that they agreed with parts of what I said, that they may have had disagreements with some of it, but what I was doing was honest about it. Monsanto took it a step further, or whoever sponsored this one. They actually printed out my words, put it on a flyer, and then put it into a newspaper, which they then delivered to whichever houses got the newspaper in Maui. So I woke up here in Oahu and started getting phone calls from my friends in Maui saying, hey, did you write something in favor of the GMO initiative? It was very interesting the way I learned how people could both take whatever you say and use it to support either side. And that's important. This is one of the important reasons you don't talk too much when you talk to the news. You only talk just enough. This was gifted to me a few years after the fact, actually. But this was gifted to me a few years after the fact by Kirby Bell, who was the president of my college fraternity before I was. And the whole story is its own story. We should probably share at some point. But when I graduated high school, I got on a bus, not a plane, a literal bus, and drove across the country to start college at the University of Arkansas. About as different as you can get from Hawaii, and about as different as you can get from my hometown of Los Angeles. Got on a bus, went to Arkansas, and the first thing we did was I looked into joining a fraternity. I wasn't going to, but someone had called me and suggested it. It wasn't a lot of money to go through the process, so I figured, well, let's try. I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen, right? I ended up joining a fraternity, and the worst thing that happened is a year and a half later, they made me the president, and I ended up becoming the president of, maybe it was just a year later. It was it was a year later I ended up becoming the president. So my sophomore year of college, I was the president of a fraternity in Fayetteville, Arkansas, go Razorbacks. And as a president, what the last president is supposed to do is they gift you a gavel. And it meant a lot to me, and I still treasure it, and I keep it in my office, so I have it. What else do I got? This is killing me. So this is my book collection. I have all sorts of transcripts over here. I have books on law, books on arguing. You know what? Let me see if I can find my favorite book, and then I'll leave you with this. Up here is my thank you cards, just a few. I didn't want to put them all. And then, oh, let me do this. Here's just a couple awards. The small ones are not the most serious. The one in the middle is Super Lawyers. This is Rising Stars, but I also have the more recent Super Lawyers. Super Lawyers, one of the big ones, one of the real ones. It's also a cutout newspaper article case award. But let me see if I can find my favorite book. This is how you know how little I planned this out. The book I was looking for is not there. I don't know where it is. I hope someone stole it, because I'd hate it if I just misplaced it. But for example, here's one of the ones I like. F. Lee Bailey, To Be a Tri-Lawyer. I mean, I think I told you in the last video, the best way to learn is by living. And the second best way is to read about or hear stories about other people living. And the way they live informs them and informs you of what you have to do. So this is my office. I wanted to share it with you guys because it means a lot to me. My room is me and I am it. My room is where I like to be. It looks like all my dreams, with apologies to Daniel Pinkwater. If you've ever read The Orange Splot, one of my favorite books, I literally remember a book I read since first grade. That's how important it was to me. It is important that what you do is you take a area where you feel comfortable, where you feel at home. You make it your own. I want to get into what that means and what we should do, why, how that translates to when you're homeless, what trouble that brings to you, that you have nowhere you feel safe, that you have nowhere to create, that you have nowhere to have that peace, because really that's all we're looking for. So thank you to everybody for watching. Always shout out to Doc Rock for inspiring me to do this, always being there when I text him with a question. Bradley Teaches, if you saw anything I animated today, that's there. Kalandi, who gave me permission, YouTube, for playing the song in the beginning. That's my intro song. He said it was good because it is going to be a lovely day. And let me shout out John LeBlanc, Johnny Pounds, because he's my hero and he needs to get shout out every chance we can. Thank you guys. Don't know what day 3 is going to be, but let's see what it is. And hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you did. How about this? If you like it, or even if you don't, ask me a question in the comments if you can. I hate to ask for comments because then what happens is there's no comments and you feel like a horrible human being. Ask me a question in the comments if you can, and maybe that could be an inspiration for a question and answer vlog that I do later. That could get me to day 3, to tell you the truth. So thank you guys very much. Thank you to the Let's Get Live community, and stay legal.